Hi, Ken McCarthy here. Today I'm going to talk about the process of producing a final investigation report. So, as many of you know, my purpose is to help leaders prevent bad things from happening in their organizations, things like harassment, violence, wrongdoing, and fraud. Sometimes we're called in after something's happened and we're asked to do the investigation. So, that's a process I'll talk about. So, in this particular case, for this client, I don't have the client's name up here or anything. I'm writing a report right now. This particular client has this process where we sent out this preliminary report. So what happens in the investigation process is allegation comes in, it makes it to someone like myself. I take a look, I put together questions I want to ask the parties, and eventually start producing reports. So I produced a preliminary report in this case, and it was where I captured what the complainant told me about their experience about the incident. Any evidence or emails that they included, I put in there as well. The respondent, so the person who's accused of the wrongdoing or the misconduct, I put in the report what they have told me in response, and then witnesses, what they told me about the whole story. So this preliminary report that I put together, it tells the story without any conclusions, just this is the information that I collected from the parties. And where that's very useful is what this particular client does, and many clients do with that, is they provide the preliminary reports to the parties, so the complainant and the respondent, and they have a chance to see that the investigator, myself, captured, their experience correctly. And then they also get to see what the other people said about them, about the incidents. So they can see what witnesses said, and again, they can see what the other party said. This is really important from a procedural fairness perspective. And here in Canada, federal court back in just about a month ago, May 2024, issued a decision that said these things are really, really important to do. So here's the process I'm following today. So I sent out the preliminary report. I've now received feedback from the parties, from the complainant, from the respondent. Witnesses don't see it, but I see now what they said. So I've got this preliminary report that I drafted with all sorts of information in it. I don't want to produce another report and just add more to it, because this case, in many cases, the report was already too long. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the original representation, say there's 20, 30 bullet points, and I'm summarizing them. I'm condensing them down into, at a relatively high level with certain facts in there. I'm telling the story of what happened. So I've got, the complainant. First step in my process is I took my draft report, changed the header, turned it into a final report, fixed a few other things in there. And then I summarized. So again, I went from like 20 points to maybe about 5 points. There's no formula for, what you need to do. Effectively, what you need to do is you need to tell the story in a more condensed, summarized form so that the reader, at the end of the day, could be those parties who are involved, could be management. They understand that I captured the story and they understand what the story was. So started out with summarizing what the complainant told me. Then the next section is I summarized what the respondent told me. So this again was in their original interviews with me, in the original complaints, in the original evidence. Also summarized what the witnesses had told me. So I had several witnesses in this case. So I brought it down to just a handful of bullet points describing, globally what the witnesses told me. Next section I get to is the complainant's response to the preliminary report. So as I said, they received it, they saw what the other person said, they saw what witnesses said, and now they provide their response. So I take that and I put it into the report. Not everything needs to go in there, but I need to make sure that I capture, important evidence, things that contradict what was said, whatever is going to make sense for the story so people can understand. And so I can demonstrate that, yes, I listened, I found the right evidence, and I'm using it moving forward. So what the complainant said in response, do the same thing with what the respondent provided in response to the preliminary report. So they gave me a whole bunch of stuff. So I'll look at what's in there. Sometimes there's irrelevant stuff. So you just want to make sure that you acknowledge that you received it. If it doesn't go in the report because it's not relevant, I usually will put a sentence or two in there. The individual provided other information relating to this, just so they can see that I listened, and I considered what they told me. So again, the witnesses didn't receive a preliminary report, so there's nothing from them. The next section here is I'm doing an analysis. So I've got the story. I've got original complaint, original testimony, if you want to call it. I've got then what they said after they had a chance to, see each other's perspectives. Then I do an analysis. And what I'm doing there is I'm going to have to come up with a credibility assessment. So who do I believe and why? And I have to justify that. Certainly, I want to make it clear in the report, who I found more believable. And I may have to testify at some future point before a tribunal or court. So I want to make sure I really articulate what's in there. And you're looking at things like, is the story plausible? Is it consistent? Is there any corroborating information from anybody else or any evidence that you could rely on to say, yes, I believe this person over that person? Is there a pattern? Repeated sort of incidents, those sorts of things. You get into balance of probabilities. So these administrative workplace investigations. It's not like a court of law where beyond a reasonable doubt, someone is either found guilty or not guilty, right? This is balance of probabilities. So some people talk about it as 51% one way or the other. I describe it as what most likely occurred. So at the end of the day, an administrative investigator like myself, I have to again decide, okay, who I believe, and then, if the stuff happened or didn't happen, is it more likely that it did or didn't happen, which is the next section here. I do these things called findings of facts. So, did the incident take place, yes or no? So, I'll give you an example. Maybe there's part of the complaint is there was a conversation between two parties on a particular date. So did that conversation happen? Yes, no. Okay, so I'm just determining, did it happen, did it not happen? Based on that balance of probabilities, what most likely occurred, based on credibility assessments. Sometimes you don't have emails or screenshots or anything else to prove that something happened. Sometimes you do. After I've looked at, did the incident happen, then I go to this conclusion section. Part of my analysis is, okay, so I said, yes, the incident did happen. There was a conversation and these things were said. Then I take a look to see, okay, what I found there or what happened, is it a bad thing? So is it something that is contrary to a code of conduct? So say a code of conduct says people will need to be respectful in the workplace. And in this particular conversation, someone was yelling and screaming and shouting and swearing. So I have to look at that definition of, what you're supposed to do according to this code of conduct or values and ethics code or whatever, and then say, okay, this thing happened, test it against that definition, and I come to a conclusion. Yes, it is a violation of the code of conduct, or no, it is not. And so I do that. So I follow that process for each of the incidents. So if there's 10 incidents, I'm going to go through this exercise 10 times. Last thing is I'm going to put together an executive summary. So in addition to doing investigations, I was also a client of investigations, which means that in my government days, I actually had employees working in my organization who had been under investigation at certain points. Thankfully, it didn't happen a lot because it's a stressful situation, but it did happen. So I was always of the view that when you produce an investigation report, there's all sorts of important things in there legally that, you have to stand on. But you want to make sure you tell the story clearly so the client at the end of the day knows, okay, are they dealing with a problem and what do they need to do moving forward? They're not getting that advice from me. They're getting it elsewhere for this particular type of investigation. So just a real quick summary. Last stage of the investigation process. I've gone out with a preliminary report. The parties, the complainant, the respondent have provided feedback to that preliminary report. I start writing my final report, and I took that template from the preliminary report and I converted it. I summarized what I had captured in maybe 10, 20 bullets before into a smaller number of bullets, saying, this is what I heard the first time from this person. This is what I heard. This is what I heard. Then you get into their responses to these preliminary reports. Okay, so they saw these preliminary reports, and this is what else I heard. Now, Normally, it's just an assessment when they respond. I take a look to see if I captured, or they look to see if I captured the story correctly. You might see new evidence. It's not often that you do see new evidence. Oftentimes, people are restating things, or sometimes they're providing things that can contradict what someone else said. But I capture what they've said in response. Then I do my analysis. Who do I believe? The credibility assessment. I do my findings of fact based on balanced probabilities, what most likely occurred. I come to a conclusion. Okay, if it did happen, was it a bad thing? Yes, no. Put my findings down, put together the executive summary so the client can understand the story. You get the legal stuff captured, certainly, but the client can understand, okay, what happened, why, and then where they move forward. And that is it. So that's the process that I follow for producing my final reports. Again, Ken McCarthy, if you want to discuss or ask any questions about harassment, violence, wrongdoing, fraud, preventing those sorts of things, reach out to me at integritybymccarthy.ca. Again, integritybymccarthy.ca. Also by cell phone or text at 613-794-6127. Again, 613-794-6127. Thank you.